Okay, let's do a video. Stream is connected. We're good. So this is third in a series that I have titled Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire. And what's going on here? There we go. Out of the frying pan into the fire. Basically, I think we're in a bad place. I think we're in trouble. The Earth system, according to my interpretation, is on the move. It's a machine in which we live. We live inside this machine in the same way that you live inside of a house or apartment or an RV or something like that. If something were to happen to your house, your habitat, you would be disturbed. You would be frightened. You'd be looking for help. You'd be turning to all directions for help. You know, the roof got torn off. The ground moved out from under you. There was a landslide, and now your house is hanging on a precipice. Sewer pipe blew up in the front of your house, and all of a sudden the grounds are covered with sewage. If something bad happened to your living situation, you would be looking for help. Well, the Earth is our home. And it is a habitat inside of which we have been evolving for 300,000 years, inside of which we have had many attempts, some of them still ongoing, at civilization, within which we have explored, invented, innovated, invented gods and religions and cast them aside, and in which we currently live and are doing whatever it is that we do. And one of the things we're doing inside of the Earth system is we're burning fossil fuels. We've discovered the free energy. We've been held to the energy of the sun and the limitations therein, which are fairly significant. The limitations from the sun, although it's usually there, and we don't have to worry about it being there or not being there. We don't have to do anything. It's not that reliable. It's more reliable near the equator. It's less reliable near the poles, where half the year they have eternal night. And, in general, you can have cloud cover and you can have rain and you can have other forms of weather. You can have floods, all kinds of things come from the sky, all of them driven by the sun. So we have a kind of when it's working for us, it's great. When it's not working for us, it's bad. We try to cope with when it's not working for us, and we plow ahead when it is. And that's been our relationship with the planet and the sun and the atmosphere and the biosphere and the lithosphere and all the rest of it for 300,000 years that we have been here during an ice age. And the ice age started 5 million years ago. So that has been going on the planet Earth a lot longer than we have even been around as Homo sapiens. So all that's moving. All that's on the move. Everything that you think and I think is sacred and eternal isn't. I don't want to say it's over, because that means things to people that I don't intend to imply. I'll talk about it being over, but I want to be very specific about that when I'm doing it. What's over is actually the stability that we have enjoyed for hundreds of thousands of years. And that has been critical to the rise of civilizations, the rise of culture, the rise of the various ages, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Industrial Age. That stability is over. That's done. Now, the world, the Earth system will go into a different regime. We will go with it because we're inside of it. Where it ends up is hard to say. I mean, it isn't, but it is hard to say. What's hard to say is how soon will we get there? How soon will it stabilize? What will it look like after it's done moving? When it finally stops moving, what will things look like for us? And the other thing that's hard to say is, will we even be there as humans? I can guarantee you we will not be there as a civilization. This civilization is finished. This civilization is entirely dependent on fossil fuel inputs 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, 100% of the time for 100% of everything. And that's done. That's over. Not because I say so, but because of the laws of physics. And what this video is about in this series of 3 is where are we going and how are we going to get there. This is sufficiently complicated that I've had to think about this for a few days. And I actually, believe it or not, first time ever, well, maybe second time ever, I have notes. So I'll be looking at my notes when I'm having this conversation. I might even have to take a moment to edit my notes. I might even come back with another video as I continue this thought process. It's kind of important to me that I get this right. And the reason is because I'm writing another book. I haven't started writing it yet. I haven't actually started committing words to a document, but I'm working on it in my head. And that's one of the reasons I do these videos. Okay, I do these videos to present ideas. The book, it's actually right there. I'm pointing at it, okay? That's the book. I'm trying to do this in the mirror. Here we go. There's the book. It was 100 Days by me and available on Amazon Books. The link to the book is in the description. You should check it out. The book kind of covers videos 1, well, maybe mostly video 2 in this series. Video 1 and 2 are in the book. A little bit about the book is also in video 3, this one, which I'm just about to go into. But the second book will be about this topic right here that I'm talking about. And this topic is what's coming. You know, and I may have to do another video after this if I think of more things that I think are germane and important. So let's do this so you have something to look at besides me. And there will be other things as well because I'm going to change screens here a couple of times. So again, referring to my notes. I want to make a quick caveat because people ask this question occasionally, like, okay, so these are the things that are happening. When? Do we have any idea when all these things are going to happen? This before I get too far, this picture was created for the series. Okay, the series is called Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire, and the fire, of course, is global heating. So enjoy. The question I get occasionally, not too often, because really nobody believes any of this, but the question I occasionally get by somebody who's thinking, well, if that's happening, then I guess I have a question. And the question is, so when? When will this happen? Well, the answer is pretty simple, actually. The answer is some of it's happening already. Global heating is here. It's going on. It's been going on probably for 20 years that we could point to, meaning there's hard evidence that's irrefutable that shows that the planet is heating, and we have evidence of secondary impacts. Things like the melting of the permafrost, other things like the heat content of the ocean and the destruction of the northern boreal forests. These are all impacts of global heating. Now, they could be happening for other reasons, but they're all happening now simultaneously because of the same reason, and that's global heating. Those things have been going on for a while. There are other things still to come. Some of these things have already been predicted, meaning, here we go. Maybe it's not happening now, but it's inevitable. So it's like you're at the top of the stairs and you tripped, and you're looking and you're saying, I'm falling. And you kind of know that you're going to end up at the bottom of the stairs. You're not at the bottom of the stairs yet, but you've tripped at the top of the stairs. So now you're going to fall to the bottom of the stairs. And on the way to the bottom of the stairs, of course, you're going to hit stairs, you're going to hit railings, you're going to hit other people, whatever else is on the way. You're going to have all these traumas and all these events, and then you're going to be at the bottom of the stairs. So we're at the point now where we've tripped. We're at the top of the stairs. We've tripped. We're sailing out over the steps, and we're thinking, oh no, I'm falling. I'm going to the bottom of the stairs. So that's where we're at with a lot of this stuff. We've already tripped. We've already fallen. We're looking that we're going to end up at the bottom of the stairs. When? Well, apart from the things that are happening now, there are more things coming. And in the list of things I'm mentioning here, everything in this list, and there's a few things here. It's a pretty good list at this point. Everything in this list it will happen maybe as little as 2 years out, if not now. Okay. If not now, then certainly no longer than 2 years out. And probably this entire list will be in flight by no less than 10 years out. Now, in terms of the catastrophic collapse of the Greenland ice sheet has already been called. We're already tripped at the top of the stairs. That's at the bottom of the stairs. Greenland melts. But it may take 300 years for Greenland to melt. So that's a thing. And so everyone would think, oh, well, then I don't have to worry about Greenland melting for 300 years. No, you have to worry now. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But in fact, I should make a special note is what I'm doing. Again, because these are notes from my book. So I want to put a note here on Greenland is a polycrisis. I'm not going to tell you what it is till I get there. Sorry for that. That's why we're here. I told you there'd be more. You're watching me. You're watching me work. This is how I work. This is how I think. Points just come into my mind, and I have to write them down. So everything that I'm about to give you is either has happened now, and we're going to suffer through it, or it's going to happen very soon, like in the next 2 years. And everything on this list will be in flight by 10 years out. So this is all basically current events. Everything I'm about to mention is current events. Everything in this video is essentially current events. So what's happening? Fundamentally, the Earth is heating. The Earth is heating because we humans are burning fossil fuels. We will not stop burning fossil fuels. Therefore, the Earth will continue to heat. That's actually in the past tense. This started a century ago. It has become remarkable, meaning, wow, that's amazing. In the last 20 years, certainly since China became a major industrial power, with all the shipping and receiving and all the, the idea. So certainly since then, and global heating is actually increasing. There are signs that it is not just a constant, but it's accelerating. So the rate at which things are increasing is itself increasing. We're probably on an exponential curve. It doesn't mean it's going to be exponential forever. There may be a point where it goes up quickly and then it starts to level out again. But for now, it looks like it's an exponential curve. We are on the ascending edge of an accelerating phenomenon. This is happening over the entire planet. It's happening everywhere, and that presents a bunch of problems. What is it going to do? It's going to, the things that are currently happening, which I've been making a big deal about in the last couple of weeks in my videos. We have a collapse of the jet stream, which is instigated by a collapse of the polar vortex. I could bring that up. I'll bring it up when I talk about the AMOC, because I have to go to a different application, so I'll wait until I do it then. The collapse of the jet stream is leading to wild weather. Eventually, the wild weather will only get more and more wild, up to a point, again, where it stops getting more wild, but it's still, at that point, really wild, and it stays really wild for a long time, like thousands of years. For now, it's just it's wilding, it's getting worse. Now, you can't have wild weather, unpredictable weather, catastrophic weather, without eventually having damage to crops. A lot of our crops are grown in land that is not irrigated. It's called dry land farming, not because it's dry, because it depends on rain. So the rains, which are predictable, and again, why are the rains predictable? Because we've been living in an earth dynamic system that has been stable for centuries, if not thousands of years. The last big disturbance to the earth system was like 6,000 years ago, the so-called mini ice age that caused a lot of disturbances, but that was probably due to just repercussions, echoes of the collapse of the glacial maximum. So we were leaving a glacial maximum behind. We were going into a new glacial minimum with the least amount of ice. And on the way, there are hiccups and stair steps. And we had probably the last one of those, the last destabilizing event as we descended into a ice minimum was about 6,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas, and which they call the mini ice age. And there's been mini ice ages since, but probably they were caused by volcanoes or similar short-term phenomena. So we have been, though, on a whole, even with all that going on, things have been remarkably stable. And because things have been stable, we have established civilizations where we did. We established dryland farming and later irrigated farming where we did. We grew certain crops in certain areas because we could. And we knew that. And we did that in the past, and we're doing it still. There have been a few examples where ecosystems and regional climates have completely collapsed. One of them apparently is North Africa. There is some evidence that the early peoples in the North African area actually had not a desert, but a swamp. So we know that things can change. The desertification of North Africa, I haven't read up on it. I don't really know what happened, but it happened. Also, the progenitor of Western civilization, which took place in Mesopotamia, so that's the Akkadians, the Sumerians, who else? You know the bunch. You couldn't have a civilization there now. It's too arid. So something happened. Climate changed. Things changed. And that has happened elsewhere across the earth. This earth is not completely stable. We have had to adapt. And we did. Obviously, we're still here. Another thing that was happening during that time was that the ice that had been present in large quantities during the glacial maximum was still retreating. And there was also some sea level rise during that time. So as the ice melted, as it retreated, it melts. That's how it retreats. It doesn't disappear into space. It just melts. And as it melts, the water flows into the sea. As the sea receives more water, the sea level starts to rise. One of the events that took place, well, there's several events, but I'll mention one here because it affects the UK and Europe in particular, was that the UK was just a peninsula attached to Europe until fairly recently. And what happened was that the ice was still retreating in North America and northern Eurasia. And as it retreated, sea level continued to rise. And so there was a low area between the United Kingdom today and Europe. There was a low area, and we call it Doggerland. And it was discovered fairly recently. It was discovered that people were there. And then we had to figure out, well, what happened? And then we figured out, oh, yeah, the ice was still melting. Of course, it got flooded. So what happened with Doggerland, this low area, well, it was swampy, marshy, is that as sea level rose, as the ice retreated, it continued to retreat, right? Because we're leaving behind the glacial maximum and going into a glacial minimum. And so as that happened, the sea level kept rising, and it flooded Doggerland and cut off what is now the UK, an island, and the UK and Ireland, and the Orkney Islands and all the rest of it, cut it off from the mainland. And now there's the English Channel in the North Sea, where there used to be land. So things have changed. The ice continued to melt until what we have now are remnant ice from the last glacial maximum. The remnant ice is now found mostly in the Alps, the Himalayan mountains, Greenland, and Antarctica. So these are remnant ice left over from the melt of the ice from the last glacial maximum. And in some future, when we go back into another glacial maximum and the ice begins to advance, it would advance from these places. So the ice would form around Antarctica, spread to South Africa and southern South America, and then beyond the land, and then it would advance northward from there. Likewise in the north, Greenland would spread its ice out, freezing the sea solid, and so on. So we could go into another glacial maximum, but we're not going to, because we've changed the system. And now we have terminated the Ice Age, which started about 5 million years ago. That's terminated. That's done. Now we go forward into what is called hothouse Earth. This transition, though, is going to cause things that used to make sense to us to no longer make sense. Places where we could have croplands, we won't be able to, because everything will have changed. Places where you could have coastal cities, you won't be able to. Just as Doggerland flooded as the ice retreated, our coastal cities will flood as the ice on Greenland and Antarctica melts. That's remnant ice from the glacial maximum. But the glacial maximum and the interglacial that we're in now only makes sense. We can only have that conversation in the context of an ice age. We have now terminated the ice age at 430 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, up from 250 or even 200. You can't have an ice age. So it started 5 million years ago. We have terminated it, and now we're going into a new system of climatic regimes, and the Earth dynamic system is going to have to move into that new phenomenon. And the Earth is going to heat, and as it heats, it will melt the ice, and just as Doggerland went underwater, other low-lying areas will go underwater. Now, that's not going to happen in this 2 to 10 year time frame I'm talking about, but we could have enough initial sea level rise in the initial melt of this at the end of the ice age to still cause a lot of damage. In general, the heating of the Earth is going to lead to a loss of crops because those places won't make sense anymore for agriculture, not the kind we do. And we're also going to just lose stability in general. People depend on the weather to do certain things. People depend on the seasons to do certain things. If you're dry land farming and you're depending on the rainfall, then it's not going to happen. And then the food can't be grown. Those people don't have a livelihood anymore. If they're farmers and they're supposed to grow wheat or corn or something, and they're waiting for the rains and the rains don't come, then they're out of business. And they're also out of a livelihood, and they're also culturally decimated. So these people will not have stable lives anymore. But likewise, if your state, your country, your region, your province expects annual rains to fill reservoirs that then provide you with water for drinking and irrigation and urban life and everything else, but the rains have moved, they've gone further north, they've gone south, they hit some other part of the same landmass, and now your reservoirs are not filling up, then you're just not going to have a story anymore. You created your cities, your agriculture lands, your navigable waterways, everything was there that made sense during stability. But now that the Earth is on the move and is taking us with it, because we don't have another option, the places where we currently are may not make sense anymore. And this is already happening. And I'll mention in a moment some examples of that. We may right now, we may be in a place where we will have sudden ice melt, ice loss. Greenland is already melting. It is in terminal decline. Terminal decline means that it is going to termination. All the ice will melt. It is in terminal decline and it cannot recover. There will be more ice loss than there is ice gain during the winter. They had, some years back, they had rain in the summer at the top of the Greenland ice sheet. There were researchers up there. They had a camp. I don't know what kind of camp it was, but they can't be there in the winter. They can only be there in the summer. So they had their summer camp. They were up there, and they have a weather station up there. And what do weather stations do? They measure the wind direction and speed. They measure the temperature, the barometric pressure, a bunch of other things. But apparently, because they're at the top of Greenland ice sheet, miles and miles up there, cold, everything's frozen all the time, they didn't even have a rain gauge. This is my recollection. I hope I'm correct. They didn't have a rain gauge, and then it rained. It rained on the Greenland ice sheet, and they were completely flabbergasted. Here they are in their encampment at the top of the ice sheet, and it's raining, and that was the first. Certainly, since they had been there, they had never observed that before. They were completely unprepared for that, and as far as we know, it was the first rain on the top of Greenland since maybe 10 million years ago. Because since 10 million years ago, it's been so cold that actually we've had an ice age. Not a rain age, an ice age. So there was no rain on the top of Greenland. On top of the ice in this case. Now, Greenland is an island, so there is soil and rock down there somewhere. But the people, there's so much ice, people are living on the ice. There's another one that's in terminal decline, almost certainly, and that's the Thwaites Glacier, which is part of Antarctica. It's on the West Antarctic ice sheet. I'll call it the WAIS, W-A-I-S, and you need to be familiar with that because there's some bad news coming out of Antarctica. The Thwaites Glacier is huge. The West Antarctic ice sheet is believed now to be in terminal decline. It's going to melt. It is land-based ice, and land-based ice, as with Greenland, when it goes into the sea, raises sea level. Sea-based ice, when it melts, doesn't raise sea level. It was already in the sea. So melting it, freezing it, doesn't make any difference. But when land-based ice melts, that goes into the sea. The Thwaites Glacier is in terminal decline. I saw a report just recently where the Thwaites Glacier decline has accelerated. They thought it might. They thought they understood when it would. They thought it would be decades out. It's already started. And this has been a refrain throughout all of climate science and climate research. Happening sooner than expected, worse than expected, more than expected. We hear this all the time. I don't know whether I should blame scientists for this or academia for this, because academia is a business. You got to understand that. Academia is a business, and it uses scientists to do business. And when scientists do work, but then it goes into the grist mill of academia, business gets done. And what gets reported isn't always what was going on. And you say, that's because they're making it up. No, they're not making it up. They're not inventing any data. They're removing data. We call it sandbagging. They're removing data and making it less likely, more difficult for people to understand what's really happening. So, surprise, surprise, the Thwaites Glacier, they thought they had 20 years, decades, maybe even a century before we had to worry about the collapse of what they called the Doomsday Glacier, the Thwaites Glacier. Well, it's collapsing. It's on the move. It's accelerating. The collapse is accelerating. It's worse than expected, faster than expected, sooner than expected. The Thwaites Glacier, just like Greenland, dumps into the sea. And every time it dumps anything into the sea, even solid ice, and of course it's dumping water too, because it's melting. Anytime it dumps anything into the sea, we raise sea level. It's not a lot, it's something, it's going to add up. And it could happen rapidly, because it's speeding up. We don't know when it's going to happen. But in addition to the ice on Greenland and on Antarctica, I was just talking about one glacier, there's also mountain ice. The Himalayan mountains are in terminal decline. The nations of India and Pakistan share a waterway called the Indus River, named after the Indus civilization, which used to be in that same area before India and Pakistan were nations. Actually, it goes way back. The Indus civilization goes back thousands of years. And so there's the Indus River flows through the Indus Valley. And my wife is back. The water that comes down off the Himalayan mountains, including into the Indus River, is important for agriculture, human uses, industry, and it all comes from the ice in the Himalayan mountains. I mean, they get rain, they have monsoon rains, and so the rivers will fill up, and then but if you don't get constant ice melt flowing into the rivers, then the rivers can actually dry up between rain events. And there's a dry season in this part of the world where the monsoons, they come in and they dump a lot of rain. It all flows to the sea, and then there's a dry season after that. But they count on the constant melting of the Himalayan mountains to keep these rivers and reservoirs full. Well, there are now catastrophic melt events in the Himalayan mountains. These can cause flooding. These can cause ice loss. So when you have catastrophic flooding in Pakistan due to a huge amount of water coming down from the Himalayan mountains, you may not know that you just lost a bunch of ice, but you did. Eventually, you may lose so much ice in the Himalayan mountains that important waterways that flow into Pakistan and India and Bangladesh just become intermittent, or at least unreliable. Or maybe there's so little water flow that they become so quickly polluted with human uses and agricultural runoff and industry, that there's not enough water coming through to clean the pollutants out. So yeah, the water's there, the water's moving, it's not zero, but the uses that they have made of these waterways, which made sense when there was a lot of milt water coming down from the mountains, no longer makes sense. They keep flushing their toilets into the river. They keep dumping, barrels of industrial waste into the river, but the water in the river isn't moving fast enough to wash these things away. So the rivers become so polluted that they won't be usable. So you can have water in the river. You can have, and it's visibly there, but you can't drink it. You can't use it for agriculture, and then you have a water crisis. Iran is currently having a water crisis because they've had no rain for like 6 years now, or so little rain that it doesn't matter. They've got thousands of reservoirs, but now they're all useless. Some of them are useless because they filled up with water, but the water hasn't kept flowing through. Again, the same problem. You can fill the reservoir, but if the water isn't flowing through, then the water that sits in the basin behind the dam can become polluted. And then you wouldn't even want it flowing through because you couldn't use it for anything, least of all drinking and agriculture. And the pollutants in some of these reservoirs are salts from the desert. You go to a desert area and you put a dam and you fill it up with water and you think you've done a great thing, and you come back later and the water's salty. Why? Because it picked up salts from the desert. Because the desert has had a lot of erosion, a lot of mineral deposits, but not a lot of rain. Because of the part of the world that it's in. So now you put a reservoir, all those salts minerals and metals get absorbed into the water column. And when you try to use the water, it's polluted. Where did the salts come from? They were there all along. You shouldn't have built a reservoir there. They didn't know that. They didn't care. They're just building reservoirs, thinking they're doing a good thing. And now Iran, the capital city of Iran, Tehran, has run out of water. That's a current event, but that's also going to proceed apace elsewhere in the world. Here in the U.S., there is a lot of the dry land farming, which is dependent on rain coming in periodically on a schedule. So you can plant this week and it's going to rain next week. That's the scheduling, all right? It's not happening anymore. So they've been pumping a lot of water out of the ground. There is a fossil lake underground in the center part of the United States. It's called the Oglala Aquifer. It's fossil water. It's left over from the last glacial maximum. As the ice melted, some of it soaked into the ground and created essentially an underground lake. So as the rains have begun to falter and not work, or they have more land than they have rain for, which is another thing, because that's land use management. We always screw things up. Regardless, they've had to pump out of the Oglala Aquifer, but that water's never coming back. That water is the result of the last glacial maximum and the melt of the ice that used to be down at that latitude. Well, there's not going to be any more ice. And there's no plan, really, there's no mechanism to refill the Oglala Aquifer. So as it draws down, as you do, water's going out, nothing's going in. As it draws down, they have to drill their wells deeper, and at some point, they're going to run out of water. When's that going to be? 2 years from now? 10 years from now? I don't know. But at some point, especially if climate change causes these dryland farms to not get the rain they want or need, and therefore they have to pump even more, then the Oglala Aquifer could draw down very quickly, and we may have many reasons, a polycrisis, many reasons why we can't farm in the middle of the country anymore, in addition to climate change. The Oglala Aquifer, which is sort of propping up agricultural activities in that region, that could just disappear. So that's mountain ranges. There's another thing that could happen, and on a big scale. It's happening right now on a smaller scale, and it's almost not worth mentioning, but I'm going to mention it because people have begun to notice, and will notice more in the future. As the planet heats, and as this begins to affect snowfall, then you're going to lose your snow areas. Now, this is important in California because snow is like a reservoir for water. We fill our reservoirs in the rainy season here in California, and then we draw the water down to do agriculture and for human uses, but we don't worry about drawing it down because we know there's going to be more water that comes down from the snowpack. Well, as the planet heats, you actually get less snow at higher altitudes, and you get rain. Okay, well, the rain runs down, fills the reservoir. That's okay. But where's your snow? Because you're going to need the snow in the dead of summer when the reservoirs have been pulled down. We've had pretty good snow year this year in California because of a collapse of the northern jet stream. Another topic. But this is happening all around the world. The ski areas in California that rely on a lot of snow to fall, the ski areas, these recreational areas, are basically almost out of business. You can't ski on rocks. They try to make artificial snow at night when it's colder, and they try to make snow for the next day, and maybe there's some slopes that people can ski on. But these ski resorts their business model is done, and this is important for the communities up there. The jobs, economic growth, the whole thing, property taxes, a tax base for the community. If these ski resorts collapse, then those communities become unviable. And this is going to be a theme throughout this, as that communities become unviable. That the things that made sense 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, those things don't make sense anymore. Where you put your community was fine so long as you had a ski season. But if you can't have a ski season, then you can't have that community there. Because that was the source of income. So when the income disappears, these people have to move. They don't have a job. They used to work at the inn. They used to work at the ski resort. They used to work at the hostel. They used to work at the supermarket. And the people pulling in with the skis on the top of the vehicle, and they're all in the toboggans in the back. They're all going to go skiing. Well, they pop into the snack shop and they buy food and beverages and drinks and all this stuff, and then they go up the mountain. And well, if those people don't come, what happens to that store? What happens to that ski lodge? What happens to that wide spot in the road? It disappears, and then those people have to leave, and then those people are basically climate refugees. And the same thing would happen to dryland farmers if they don't get the rain, and if the Oglala aquifer disappears because they had to pump it so hard. They become climate refugees. That wasn't on their bingo card. They weren't looking forward to someday being a climate refugee. Will they even call themselves that? Probably not. It'll probably be illegal to call somebody a climate refugee, because it's already illegal in many parts of the country to use the word climate change in official government documentation. And climate research is being shut down. These people will never know what hit them. The people working at the ski lodge will never know what hit them. They'll never know where the snow went. They'll know that it rains a lot, but they'll never connect the dots. Well, it's raining right now. It should be snowing. We're not going to have snow this year. There's not going to be any tourists coming up here. Now, you wouldn't even know this was happening unless you lived up there, and you worked at the ski lodge. You worked in the towns near the ski lodges. You worked on the highways that, shops and hotels that take people to the ski lodges. They'll know. They'll know the snow disappeared, but no one else will know. And no one else will be allowed to know. But those people become refugees. Where are they going to go? How are they going to feel about that? Are they going to be angry? Are they going to be happy? What do you think? And as the earth heats, the disappearance of the snow will actually impact entire communities. This is happening in the Alps. There's been massive landslides in the Alps as the snow, the ice that holds the mountains top together like glue. As it melts, the rocks begin to come free, and they come down. And they've had massive landslides in the Alps where villages that have been there for hundreds of years, medieval villages, that are now, of course, tourist destinations. People like to go there, like to see the Alps and the snow and the beautiful landscape. Well, those villages are now no longer viable, and they're getting buried under mountain slides as the ice melts and the rocks come down. It's not safe to be there anymore. And they close them to tourism first, and then they have to evacuate the people. Those people are climate refugees. Where are they going to go? Well, they might go to the next village down, but that means that there's more people than there's work. People are going to have to move further. Wages will be depressed because there's so many people looking for work, and this is a major disruption in the Alps. Also affecting the tourist industries, like the skiing and the visiting and the sightseeing. And all of this leads back to loss of water resources. The ice in the Alps and the Himalayas and the Rocky Mountains, and these are sources of fresh water as they melt and as they are restored. And then they melt, and then they are restored by wintertime. And then they melt, and then they are restored. But as they are not restored because of global heating, then the water you get off of it also is not restored. And when it's raining on the top of Greenland, that's a sign that you're finished. You may not be finished in 2 years, you may not even be finished in 10, but it's now in progress. And so this is what we can look forward to. This is what's coming for us. We thought that the Alps would always be, we thought that the ice would always be there in the Alps. We thought the ice would always be there in the Himalayan mountains. We created entire civilizations, entire industries around this. We have entire tourist industries in the Sierra Nevada mountains for skiing. We thought this would be forever and eternal. But now it's going away because of global heating, which cannot be stopped. How will people cope? How will they adapt? Where will they go? What will they do? I don't know. But they're running out of time to figure that out. Simple as that. Now, Greenland is a polycrisis. And this one in particular I have to focus on. Greenland, as we like to say, is a ticking time bomb. Greenland is a ticking time bomb. Yes, the ice will melt on Greenland and it will flow into the sea. How rapidly that happens will determine how rapidly the sea rises as a consequence. This happened before when the Laurentide ice sheet melted at the end of the last glacial maximum. We flooded Doggerland. All right, so been there, done that. What else can we fuck up, right? Well, as Greenland melts, I think there's 27 feet, to about 9 meters or something, two numbers that stick in my head, of sea level rise on Greenland alone. But you don't have to wait for the 300 years for all the ice to melt on Greenland, and then you have 27 feet of sea level rise, and you're like, oh, woe is me. Okay, you don't have to wait 300 years for that. Because the first foot of sea level rise, however we get it, is going to be massively disrupting. And by the time 27 feet shows up, we're probably so completely disrupted that we may not even exist anymore. You'll be flooding coastal cities that nobody lives anymore. They've been abandoned for centuries already. And so now they're going to flood. Who cares? People had to leave those cities, those communities, those resources with 1 or 2 feet of sea level rise. And then they were gone. And they never came back because there was nothing to come back to. It's hard to imagine, but this is what is likely to happen. When can you get 1 foot of sea level rise from Greenland? I don't know, 10, 15 years? Could happen. If it starts raining at the top of Greenland, like all the time in the summer, rain is the natural enemy of ice. You can get enormous amounts of ice melt and resulting sea level rise from an event like that. But there's actually a bigger problem. Then someday Greenland is going to melt, and someday there will be a big, huge sea level rise, and someday it'll be like Doggerland. Everything gets flooded, and we don't even know that it was ever dry land, and someday that will happen. What's actually more likely to happen first is something called isostatic rebound. Now, this is where a geologist would probably weigh in and tell you, it's thousands of years out. I don't want to hear that. We don't know when this is going to happen. Isostatic rebound is when a great weight on a landmass is removed. Land, even rock to some extent, is plastic. The crust that we live on, the solid ground that we live on, and the mountains and the valleys and everything, the solid part of the Earth's crust that we live on is not very deep. And it rides on a somewhat plastic, foamy, spongy layer called the mantle. And the mantle also has layers, but it's not solid. It's deformable. So when you pile up a bunch of weight, like heavy ice on Greenland, which is an island, it actually depresses the island and forces it deeper into the mantle. When that weight is removed, that crust rebounds in place. It's not moving. There's no earthquake fault. There's no motion of the thing like this. There's no slip. There's no strike. It got depressed and then it rebounded. So it all happened in place. So it's called isostatic. But in the process of rebounding, you get massive earthquakes. And these isostatic rebound earthquakes can be some of the biggest earthquakes that humanity has ever seen. The crust fractures and springs up. And the springing up is actually a particular kind of problem. Because if you have a spring up condition that's underwater or even just near water, then you have a spring up of the water. This is what happened in Japan in 2011, I think, when there was a big earthquake that damaged the Fukushima nuclear plant. So that got all in the news. But not quite so much in the news was the tsunami that came ashore and killed tens of thousands of people. It just happened so fast they couldn't even get away. You can go back and watch videos of the earthquake and the tsunami that came in, and it's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. It's just like, when is this going to stop? And it doesn't. It just gets worse and worse and worse. And it continued to worsen for hours, the water that came in. Well, that's what you get from this isostatic rebound. You get thrust faults. And if they're near water or underwater, they create a tsunami wave that then has multiple amplitudes. It bounces and bounces and bounces like a trampoline. And it sends these waves ashore. And Greenland is close enough to North America that when, not if, when, this is just basic physics, people, when it breaks loose in a rebounding event, because it will, because it must, you're going to get a tsunami that is probably unimaginable. The one that hit Japan was like a 9.0 earthquake. That could easily happen in Greenland. And what's just west of Greenland? Well, the populated North America now, right across from Greenland, is Newfoundland and places where there's not a lot of people, but Nova Scotia. But not too far south of there, not far enough south to be safe, you got the eastern seaboard of the United States of America, as well as very important populated parts of Canada. And that's the tsunami will hit these places. And it could be enormous. It could just be enormously damaging. So Greenland, not only is it going to lead to sea level rise, as the ice melts and the weight reduces, the isostatic rebound event, and there could be more than one, is going to create tsunamis that probably completely wipe out the eastern seaboard of the United States of America. Maybe not all, but maybe as far south as the Carolinas or something like that. But a good part of it, right? Certainly New York and Manhattan, Delaware, right? Washington, D.C., these places would be under a significant amount of water. A significant amount of water. So that's Greenland. Greenland is a big problem. Should we expect this within 2 or 10 years? Probably not. But it almost doesn't matter when it happens. If it happens anything less than 100 years from now, then people are going to be caught. Now, if it happens, after other things like sea level rise have happened, then the people who currently live on the east coast of the U.S. might be forced to move. They become climate refugees. They're forced to move because of sea level rise. So maybe by the time we get an isostatic rebound event on Greenland, people are mostly gone. They have had to move for other reasons. So maybe it won't affect that many people, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And so we have that to look forward to. Again, these are inevitable consequences. And by inevitable, I mean inevitable consequences of global heating. Cannot be avoided. These consequences are now baked into the cake by physics. Isostatic rebound is a thing. It's just a thing. The New Madrid earthquake in the middle of the United States of America, which happened in 1840 something or something like that, New Madrid earthquake, in the middle of the country. Not San Francisco, any other place with Alaska, Chile. It's not some place with mountain building and earthquake faults and the whole thing. Middle of the country, middle of the continent. The New Madrid earthquake was huge. Now, of course, we didn't even have geology working in that area at the time, so they don't even know. But it was an isostatic rebound earthquake. There's no faults there. Well, there are faults, but they're not what you'd associate with like the San Andreas fault or the no, I can't even remember. There's a fault right here in the South Bay. Lawrence, Fremont, I can't remember now. Faults that actually leave ruptures in the land where you can actually stand on each side of the fault and you can see where the earth is slipping past itself. Fences get crooked and all that. That's an earthquake fault. What happened in New Madrid was just isostatic rebound. And the event was the same thing that's happening in Greenland. The ice melted. Yes, the ice that was left over from the last glacial maximum was still retreating, still melting, and as it melted, in addition to forming the Great Lakes, the weight was removed from the land, and so you got isostatic rebound. We are already seeing, I'm consulting my notes, we are already seeing some impacts from sea level rise. Some of it's due to glacial melt, some of it's due to heating, and some of it's due to a slowdown of the AMOC. But we're already seeing examples of sea level rise, whatever the reason, or all those reasons combined, that's beginning to affect coastal communities. And here I can point to Florida. Although, just a few weeks ago, right here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, we had a king tide event that was apparently more destructive than they were expecting and more destructive than has happened in the past. King tide is when you get a really high tide. And I don't know what contributes to a king tide normally, but this one was really high. And it certainly looks like a signal of sea level rise. We don't really know what to expect from sea level rise. One of the things that is happening, though, is that Florida is beginning to flood. There are parts of Florida now, southern Florida, coastal Florida, where they have to install pumps so that when the city floods, they can pump the water out. They've had to raise the streets so that they're still passable. And salt water is very damaging to vehicles. So if vehicles are like all the time driving through salt water, then they rapidly corrode. And that's a big expense for people. And of course, if there's a big expense, people move away. So to try and protect these coastal communities from people just getting fed up and leaving, they've raised the roads, they've installed pumps all up and down the coast. And as soon as the water starts to rise, they pump it out. Maybe Florida is subsiding. Maybe it's the problems with the coral. Maybe the coral is dissolving that they built these communities on. I don't know what all is going on. They're going to have a story about it. But it sounds to me like sea level rise. And certainly, when sea level rise starts to rise to that level of difficulty for these people, we're all going to, everybody who lives in a coastal community is going to have pumps installed. And maybe they'll put seawalls too, so that when the waves come in, it holds back the waves. And maybe the seawalls will have to get higher and higher every couple of years. Florida is already pumping water out of their communities in the south of Florida. That's already happening. That's going to get worse. At some point, they'll have to abandon these communities. So they just can't stay there. And melting of the Greenland ice sheet isn't going to help. And melting of the Himalayas isn't going to help. And melting of the Thwaites Glacier, of the collapse of the Thwaites Glacier, the Doomsday Glacier as they call it, the collapse of the Doomsday Glacier in Antarctica isn't going to help. So they're already having problems, and the problems are going to get worse to a point where Florida has to be essentially evacuated. At least that part of it has to be evacuated. Then those people become climate refugees. Will they call themselves climate refugees? Will they blame it on the climate? Probably not, because that won't be a discussion point, because we're not allowed to have that conversation. I'm allowed to have that conversation, but no one else will be allowed to. And when the government has to install more pumps, they'll say, well, we're having nuisance blue sky flooding, not associated with rains or hurricanes, just a blue sky, a blue day, and yet I'm standing in 6 inches of salt water. So that's the thing. So we have to install more pumps. We have to tax people to afford the pumps. We have to have maintenance crews to make sure the pumps keep running and test the pumps and replace the pumps. And this is what we're doing. And they'll never talk about sea level rise. And no one will know. And then eventually it just becomes too much work and they have to abandon those communities. Those people become refugees. Will they ever know what hit them? Probably not. How long do they have? 10 years. This is happening already. The system is on the move. It's coming for them, and they're going to find out. Now, another thing that's happening in Florida and California, and it turns out other places as well, is that the costs of doing all these things, their response, the adaptation, and sometimes mitigation, but mostly adaptation. Mostly we go along living our lives, we're really happy, and then, oh my God, I'm standing in seawater. How'd that happen? Well, I don't care how that happened. Now I need pumps. Now I need seawalls. The adaptation, not anticipating it, but simply responding to it. The adaptation is costly. Now, had people been more forward thinking, maybe they could have done something cheaper ahead of whatever they ended up having to do, but they won't do anything ahead of time because they don't want to spend the money and they don't think there's a problem. When the problem happens is when you're standing in water. You're standing in your driveway and you're getting in your car and you go out and there's salt water. And you're looking at salt water and you're saying, wow, I have to take the kids to school, but look at all this. What is all this? Am I going to drive in this? Is this salt water? This is going to ruin my car. Wow, we have to fix this. And so then they're installing pumps, and that's how people do things. They don't think ahead. They don't build their community somewhere else. They don't even move. There's not going to be any effort to move these people. There's just going to be adaptation, and that's going to cost money. Money. Where's the money going to come from? There's other problems in Florida and including the Gulf states. The Gulf states are Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and increasingly the states inland of that as well. So you're not just a Gulf state because you're on the Gulf of Mexico. You could be a Gulf state because you're right behind a Gulf state. And that's an important distinction because what's happening to the Gulf states is that the hurricanes that are coming ashore are so violent and the damage that's being done is so extreme that the insurance companies are beginning to notice. Now, you can say global heating is a hoax. You can say it's all fear-mongering. You can say it's all, a conspiracy. But the insurance companies, they're looking at their bottom line. They're looking at their payouts. And the insurance companies are saying, oh, yeah, this shit's real. And if you cruise around on the internet long enough, you'll eventually see either insurance companies or entire industry representative groups coming out with papers that are warning that, okay, we're going to have to adjust how we write policies. We're going to have to work with governments to make sure that we don't go bankrupt. We're going to have to work with communities. Either change standards for housing or change standards for how communities are located on the coast. Maybe we need more seawalls constructed. Maybe we just need to get these people out of here. And increasingly in Florida, you can't get insurance. Now, this is also happening in California. You can't get fire insurance in many communities. Even if your community didn't burn, you can't get fire insurance because the insurance companies have noticed. They notice who's burning. And then they come into your community and they say, well, you haven't burned yet, but we know you're going to. So we're going to withdraw policies. We're not going to insure you for fire. We'll insure you for theft, or we'll insure you for, flooding inside your house if the toilet overflows. We'll insure you for that, but we want a lot of money. Or we will not insure you for fire. Or if we have to insure you for fire, because the state says we must, because that's another thing that's happening. The state is twisting their arms. Then we want a lot of money. We don't want $200 a month, and we don't want $800 a month. We want $2,000 a month for your fire insurance. And this is what we call a monetary signal. The insurance companies, they're not saying climate change is real. They're not saying that you built in a bad place. They're not saying that we should be doing more climate research. They're not saying any of those things. They're just saying that your house is going to burn. And it's going to burn next week. And for us to sell you a policy, we need to be indemnified. It has to make sense for us financially. So now we need $2,000 a month for your fire policy. And if you can't afford that, don't live here. That also works for us as an insurance industry. Don't live here. If you're willing to pay us for the policy, then we'll take your money. And yeah, we'll insure you. Although there might be riders in there that you have to construct your house a certain way, and if it wasn't constructed just right, then you're going to pay a penalty when the fire comes and consumes your home, and you want to get a payout, and they give you 10 cents on the dollar. If you didn't do it, if you didn't cut all the trees away from your house for 100 feet away, well, then they're not going to pay out on the policy. If you didn't clean all the needles out of your gutter, and we can see evidence that the needles caught fire, then we're not going to pay out on the policy. And if your driveway was too long so that the fire department couldn't get up to your house to put the fire out in a timely fashion, then we're not going to pay out on the policy. And there's going to be all these riders and all these stipulations, and they'll take your money, and then your house will burn, and they won't rebuild it. Because they want out. They want out. And this is happening all over the world. It's happening in Florida because of hurricanes. It's happening in Florida because of nuisance flooding. It's happening in California due to a combination of fires and landslides, because after the fire, then the mountainside becomes unstable and falls. So even if your house survived the fire, you may find your house sliding off the mountainside the next time it rains. So there's all these problems associated with these mountain communities and these coastal communities. This will only get worse. This is happening now. It can never improve. It can never go away. It's all global heating. The Palisades fire in Los Angeles. People say, well, it burned like that because they didn't have enough water. They had plenty of water. They ran out of water 8 hours into the fire. Yes, after every fire engine hooked up to every fire spigot that they could find, and they pumped every gallon of water they could on everything that was on fire. They ran out of water in 8 hours. Surprise, surprise. Not surprised at all. They ran out of water after 8 hours. Well, then why was the fire so bad? The fire was terrible because of 100-mile-an-hour winds. It was what they call a firestorm. And you can't fight a firestorm. You can run away from it, but you can't fight it. They couldn't even fly the fire. All the tanker aircraft that were supposed to be there to dump fire retardant and water on the fire, they couldn't fly because the wind was too severe. That whole Palisades fire, and then the Eaton fire that burned up Altadena pretty much the same day. That whole thing was caused by 100-mile-an-hour winds. Those 100-mile-an-hour winds were 100% attributable to global heating. You're having incredible wind events now because the northern polar jet stream is falling apart. We've had a series of rains here in California that were simply flabbergasting. They call them atmospheric rivers. They love to put names on things. If they put a name on something, it normalizes it. So they call them atmospheric rivers. But they all came from Hawaii. They were tropical storms, basically, and flooded Southern California. Just flooded it. They had, this time of year last year, they had catastrophic wildfires. And then this year, to follow that up, they had catastrophic rains, floodings, and landslides. And you think the insurance companies aren't noticing this? Of course they are. And this is either going to lead to a collapse of the insurance industry or a withdrawal of the insurance industry. And by the way, these are not either or. Both of those things could happen. And it could also lead to a collapse in financial markets in general. The insurance industries are actually part of the financial markets. As they go bankrupt or simply run out of money, they have to liquidate assets to make payouts. So they go to their investments, which are long-term investments, 30-year treasury bonds, all that kind of stuff. They have to sell that stuff to get money to make payouts, or they're going to go bankrupt. But some of them may simply do. They may simply say, fuck it. We're in the wrong business. Declaring bankruptcy, paying out our money to our shareholders, and we're gone, goodbye, good riddance. Find your insurance, go pound sand, we don't care. They may simply disappear. And if they disappear from the financial markets, this has a huge impact on the financial markets. Does anyone care about the financial markets? I don't know. Somebody might. This also is impacting real estate. As the floods come, as the fires come, the city of Paradise, which burned down almost completely, is only 30% rebuilt after like 5 years. That's in the north of the state. A huge fire came through, burned everything, killed a bunch of people, and it's only 1/3 rebuilt after 5 years. Now, it's not the most dynamic community. It was poor people. Well, not so much in the last 5 years, but up to the fire, there was still a lot of poor people living up there. Mountain community, what can you say? And so it hasn't come back. Those people all had to leave. And none of those people are rebuilding. They don't have money, and a lot of them didn't have insurance. So they're gone. Now they're homeless. They're living in a van. They're living in the back of a truck, whatever they're doing. The people who are coming in are coming back in slowly because there's still evidence the place is burned down. Burned down trees, burned down buildings, just the foundation left over. So who wants to build there? And City of Paradise is only about 30% rebuilt after 5 years. 30% rebuilt. And I don't even want to find out. I don't want to ask what the insurance premiums are. Likewise, Pacific Palisades, which was rich people. This is North Hollywood. This is rich people. Pacific Palisades burned last year. There were some houses that didn't burn because they were built to standards, fire resistant standards, and or they got lucky. And the amount of rebuilding so far is like pitiful. It's not even there. There's hardly anything going on in Pacific Palisades, even though those are the rich people. And some of the rich people had insurance policies. And one guy I saw in a documentary in Altadena, blue collar worker, nice guy, black guy. He said the insurance company came up with a price to rebuild my house after the fire, but it was like 1/5 or maybe even 1/6 of the assessed value. So let's say he had it was over a $1 million house according to the real estate market, but they gave him like $250,000 to rebuild it, which you can't do. There were like 16,000 houses burned, and other structures burned, businesses and whatnot, in that fire. Both of those fires. There are not 16,000 contractors who are going to rush in and build every one of those houses back all in the same year. There's a few contractors who can do the work. They have other work to do, like people who want to build a new house someplace else. Plus now they have to rebuild these communities. And they have to do this while a lot of their labor, which happens to be immigrant labor, has been forced to flee back to Mexico. So are the people that live in the community, the white people, let's just call it what it is, are they going to go to work for the contracting firms and work in the heat and work with the heavy equipment and have to lift stuff and haul stuff up on roofs and put the roofing down in the heat and deal with the heat and deal with the sun and then deal with the cold and deal with the rain? Are they going to do that? No, of course not. So these places aren't being rebuilt. La-di-da. They may never be rebuilt. Those places that burned may be done, completely done. Just done. And a lot of these insurance policies have riders on them that say, oh, we'll give you money. Sure. Here's some money. It's like 1/10 of what you need or 1/5 of what you need. We'll give you some money. Oh, but you can't just disappear. You can't just go move to some other community. You have to build right here. You have to rebuild here. That's the stipulation. We're insuring you for a rebuild. We're not insuring you just to take the money and skip. Sometimes there are riders like that on these insurance policies. They are insuring you to rebuild your home. That's what they're doing. So, of course, that's a loophole, right? They give you the money, but now you have to hire a contractor and you have to do all these things and maybe you won't do it. So they get the money back, right? Because they don't want to pay out the money. They want you to disappear when your house burns down. And then, will that lot ever sell? The lot probably goes back to the bank. Now there's no house on it. The bank has an empty lot. Just all that's left is a foundation. What does that do to the real estate industry? That house can't be sold because it's not a house. Who's going to buy an empty lot? And especially if they look at the insurance premiums. So the real estate industry basically implodes. And when the real estate industry implodes and these lots are left empty, then the tax base, property taxes in the U.S. Are collected based on basically the property. Who owns the property? Not the renter, the property owner. So when the bank owns the property, they're paying the property taxes, I guess, and they're not going to pay that. Or they're going to have the lot reassessed by the county. They're going to come out and say, look, there's no house here. We want you to reassess this lot, and we'll pay those taxes on an empty lot. And so now the property tax base begins to collapse. And maybe some of these lots sell for a penny on the dollar. So if it was $1 million house, maybe the lot sells for $10,000. Or $100,000. And so that's the assessed value, $100,000 for an empty lot with a foundation on it. So that's what the property taxes are. And then that means the counties have lost their tax base. And what's the tax base do? It pays for the fire departments, it pays for the police, well, the sheriff in the case of a county, it pays for county services, road maintenance, things like that, schools. And without that tax base, these communities implode. Now, I mentioned a while ago Greenland. Greenland is melting. It's in terminal decline. Greenland is melting. The meltwater flows into the North Atlantic. And the fear, well, actually it's an observation, but it is a fear that this is going to shut down the ocean circulation patterns, which have been carrying hot water from the equator to northern Europe. And this circulation pattern, well, around the U.S., it was called the Gulf Stream. But then they later discovered that it's more than just a stream of water that comes out of the Gulf of Mexico. They discovered it's actually its entire oceanic circulation pattern. And the importance of it is it brings temperate temperatures, temperate climate to the UK, Ireland, Scandinavia, and Northern Europe by bringing hot water in and circulating it around. This current is called the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Oceanic Circulation. And it's slowing down because of the melt of Greenland, interfering with the flow of the water. It's what's called an overturning circulation. It has to do with a balance between cold fresh water and warm salt water, and eventually the warm salt water collapses and sinks and then flows along the bottom of the ocean instead of at the top. So it's an overturning circulation, and it brings warm water to these northern latitudes in Europe. And the fear now, one of the fears, is that the AMOC is slowing down and may collapse because of the melt of Greenland. And as it collapses, it may deprive Europe and the UK and Ireland of these warming waters, and Scandinavia, plunging them into a volatile but probably cold or even freezing situation. Yes, it might do that. When is it going to do that? 10 years, 10-year time frame, maybe 20, something like that. I'm not sure that's going to happen. I know there's been a lot of talk about that, but I keep looking at the map, and all I keep seeing is that the Northern Atlantic keeps becoming anomalously hot. That's the pattern. The oceans have never been hotter. They're going to continue to heat. That doesn't stop. Even if the AMOC slows down and stops, the oceans are still hot. And that hot water is going to find some way to get to the north and cool off, because that's how heat works. It's a heat engine. Will Europe freeze in the collapse of the AMOC, or will the ocean simply continue to heat and cause whatever problems the Europeans are going to have to face? They've been getting both torrential rains at times, and in the summer, massive heat waves, both of which can be tied quite easily to global heating, and including hot water off the coast of these areas. So we don't know what the impacts are going to be on the AMOC. I don't think there's going to be an ice age. I think everything's going to continue to get hot. When I look at, well, here we can look at this. Since I have it available, we'll turn this off and this on. Yes. So when we go here, that's the U.S. This is the North Atlantic. This is a map of temperature anomalies. So the yellow and orange into the red, that's excessively hot, according to measurements. And the areas in the blue and light blue and darker blue and purple, those are anomalously cold. And anything that's black is basically average. It's the average temperature. So even though the AMOC is supposed to be shutting down and cooling down, notice that the waters around Iceland, the UK, and Scandinavia, even into the north, even into the Polar Sea, are anomalously hot. Now that doesn't mean they're hot. If you were to get in that water, you would still freeze to death pretty quick. But for the area and for the region, they're still noticeably warm. I think this is just going to continue. There's not going to, even if the AMOC slows down or disappears or shuts down, global warming is now dominant. Everything is getting hot. And these hot waters are going to find their way further and further north as the planet tends towards a condition we call hothouse Earth, where the temperature of the Earth is the same from pole to pole, which is hard to comprehend. We're supposed to be in an ice age, right? It's been an ice age for 5 million years. There's residual ice on the island of Greenland and on the continent of Antarctica. We're in an ice age. What do you mean it's going to be the same temperature pole to pole? Well, it used to be that way on Earth before we entered an ice age 5 million years ago. It used to be the same temperature from pole to pole. And the way that the temperature was maintained the same was because the oceans carried hot water pole to pole and warmed the land. And who knows what else was going on when there was hot water at the North Pole? But there wasn't any ice, and there wasn't any ice on Greenland because it was too warm. And this is the kind of thing we can now expect to continue to happen. So I don't know what's going to happen with Greenland. I'm not buying this narrative that it's going to, not Greenland, but the AMOC. What's also happening at the same time all this is going on is we are losing the northern boreal forests. The northern boreal forests are, again, a holdover from the last glacial maximum. It's cold up there. It's cold up there because there's still a lot of ice up in the north. Greenland, the Arctic, right? And so there's a forest just south of there in lower latitudes that is adapted to cold and snow. And it's called the boreal forest. Boreal means north. It's the northern forest. There's a boreal forest band that covers northern Canada, well, almost most of Canada, northern Europe, although a lot of it has been cut, so not so much anymore, Scandinavia, and northern Russia. Not northern as such, more like central Russia, because northern Russia is tundra. You can't have trees up there. But central Russia, that's the boreal forest. And when people were conquering the world and settling the world, they did not settle the boreal forests. There are very few people there, except again in Europe, where they cut most of the trees down and made them into ships so they could raid each other's ports. The boreal forest is disappearing. The boreal forest, it is too hot for the trees to live. Global heating has heated the environment enough that the trees can't really survive there. Now, there are other trees that could survive, and you could still have a boreal forest, but it would be different trees. But in the transition, the current trees have to die, and then the new trees have to slowly move in. And trees don't have legs. They can't move in quickly, right? They can only move in as fast as the seeds can be scattered. So slowly the boreal forest dies off. The new forest that could replace it, probably a deciduous forest, maples, hemlock, I don't know what all. I don't know my trees very well in that part of the world. They could move in, but in the meantime you have a dead forest. And the boreal forest in northern Canada, what's left of it in Europe and in central Russia, is dying and it's burning. Because that's what happens when you have dead trees. They burn. And they can burn because of humans. Of course, humans are silly with fire. But it can also burn because of lightning strikes. So eventually, the entire boreal forest will die because global heating is a thing. And it will burn because fire is a thing. And so these forests will disappear entirely. And in the meantime, you're going to have a massive fire. So we're seeing those right now in Canada. That will continue. But it will not continue forever because eventually they all burn. Now, that's going to have massive impacts on those communities. The communities burn. If the community is embedded in the forest and the forest burns, the community burns. But even if the community does not burn, then the reason for that community to be there might have had something to do with the forest. Maybe these were people who work in the forest as foresters. They cut down the trees. They mill up the trees into wood. They sell the wood. There could be truckers, all kinds of sawmills, all kinds of wood processing facilities making plywood and chipboard and everything else. Well, if the forest burns, you're out of business. So it's like the ski lodges. When there's no snow, you're out of business, and now you're a climate refugee. Well, when the boreal forest dies and burns, and by the way, the dead trees are not as good for lumber as the living trees, so you're kind of already screwed. But certainly when they burn, you're not going to have a forest anymore. You can't be in business. The sawmill closes. The wood processing mill closes. The power plant that was burnt, that was generating electricity based on wood products. So they take the sawdust and the chips and the bark and the limbs, they throw them in the power plant and they burn them. and then they get electricity. That mill has to shut down. So now you don't have an indigenous source of electricity. And eventually these communities just dry up and blow away. Just like the coastal regions of Florida. They get too much flooding and can't afford the insurance. They just kind of disappear. And the boreal communities disappear. And the communities that burn disappear. And every time something happens like that, then these people become dislocated, vulnerable, and they become a burden on the state and a burden on the tax base, because we're not going to let them die. Right? I mean, right? Maybe I shouldn't assume that. Maybe that is what's going to happen. Maybe these events start to become fatality events. And maybe you don't notice the fatality at the time. But, when these people become displaced and they're no longer welcomed, they're no longer wanted, nobody wants to support them, no one wants to pay for their lives, and they can't find homes for them, and they can't find work for them, and there's no reason to have them, maybe they're just allowed to quietly disappear from the scene. Maybe. That's one way to handle it. We're also losing the Amazon rainforest. The Amazon is also due to global heating, but also partly due to human behavior. The Brazilian farmers and even agricultural businesses, so not even Brazilians, not even local people, but companies coming in from other countries, they want the land that's under Amazonia to grow soybeans. The Chinese want the soybeans, but also to have cattle ranches, pig farms, other crops. And so they clear the Amazon. Then they clear the Amazon forest by burning it. They just cut a bunch of trees down and they pile them up and they set fire to them and they burn them. And then they go in and they farm the land. But the land in the Amazon, the soil in the Amazon is like a foot thick. It's a foot thick. And you can farm that for a while, depending on what you're trying to grow. But eventually, with the rain comes and the irrigation and whatever else is going on, that soil becomes used. You can actually just use soil. Crops essentially burn the soil, and they just burn it up until it starts to decrease. And this is called your topsoil. And as you put the seeds in the ground and then you take the products away, you're removing the topsoil, right, when you take the products away. And then there's erosion from the rain and even from the wind. So the topsoil begins to disappear. And since there's only a foot or two of it in the Amazon habitat anyway, then it doesn't take long to go through it. Then you're burning more Amazon. So the humans are doing this, but at the same time the humans are doing this, the climate is changing. Now the climate is changing because of global heating, but it's also changing because people are cutting the trees. The Amazon is a rainforest. It makes its own rain. So if there's any problems with the planet getting hotter, plus the farmers and the agribusinesses are cutting down the trees to get to the soil underneath, and they have to do this every year because the soil vanishes every year, then the Amazon is getting hit from all sides. And the Amazon rainforest is in terminal decline. The Amazon rainforest used to be a sequester of carbon, meaning it was containing carbon and locking it in place. And it was even removing carbon from the atmosphere. But now it's a source of carbon going into the atmosphere. Because when you burn these trees, you release the carbon that was contained in the trees into the atmosphere. Conservation of matter. You burn the trees, you return the carbon to the atmosphere, which is where it came from to build the tree in the first place. So burning these forests down, whether it's the boreal forest or the Amazon basin or any other place, when you burn these forests down, you actually contribute to atmospheric loads of CO2, enhancing the greenhouse effect and enhancing global heating. And this becomes what we call an aggravating feedback. If the boreal forest or the Amazon rainforest is disappearing because of heat, but as they disappear, they burn, then they add CO2 to the atmosphere, which increases the heat, which increases the loss of the forest, which increases the heat, which increases the loss of the forest. And that's how it works. And it's an aggravating feedback. And it's one of the reasons why this entire process is accelerating. We are in now the land of unintended consequences. As we venture forward from where we are now, we venture deeper and deeper into a land of unintended consequences, where the system, which is already on the move, accelerates, races away from normality, never returns to normality, but also increasingly races away from it. And that's where we're headed. That's what this video is about. Where are we going? We are going into the land of unintended consequences. one more thing that's going to happen to us, is happening currently, but will accelerate also. And then I'm going to talk about the human story. I have a couple of notes on some of the things that are going to happen to people as a consequence of this excursion. The other thing that is also likely to happen, we don't know when, it's already happening now, but it could really take off at some point in the future, is the melting of the methane clathrates. This is a bit esoteric. This is some weird Earth dynamics that you're not going to hear much about, but it's nevertheless critical, which is on the bottom of the ocean, there's a lot of decaying material, plant and animal material, that when it decays, it gives off methane. But it's so deep and it's so cold on the bottom of the ocean that the combination of the pressure and the cold temperature actually creates a kind of methane ice called a clathrate. And so the methane doesn't really enter the system. It gets trapped in the sediments in the bottom of the sea and on the sea floor. And these clathrates accumulate. And as sediments come washing in from erosion, the methane clathrates become buried. And that makes them even more stable. But they can melt, and they can melt catastrophically if the water gets warmer. And there's a very fine line where it doesn't even take very much. Once you hit the point where the methane ice can melt, it melts catastrophically. Because not only does the ice that's exposed melt, when the methane is released, it forms bubbles, and the bubbles agitate the sea surface as they rise. That then that removes the silt, which then exposes more methane clathrates to the same hot water. And then those melt, and that releases more methane bubbles, and that exposes even more. So this thing can collapse catastrophically. It becomes like a nuclear meltdown, where you're noticing something is wrong. This is interesting. And then you look away and you look back, and it's blown up. A nuclear meltdown can happen in seconds, at least of all minutes, okay? And the same thing with what they call the methane bomb. It's called a methane bomb because once it gets started, it's just going to run away catastrophically. The feedback mechanisms are so well understood that once this starts to melt and it reaches a certain threshold, it just takes off. And you get a methane bomb. Now, the methane bomb is interesting. People have been worrying about and talking about the methane bomb for decades now. And there's even less talk about it now because it didn't happen. But it did happen. It did happen. But it was a long time ago. 50 million years ago, we had, I think it was 55. We had an event called the PETM, the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum. The temperature of the Earth ran away. It started with, it was a natural event. We didn't exist. This was 55 million years ago, right? There were hardly even mammals. This was right after the extinction of the dinosaurs. So 55 million years ago, we had the PETM. It started out as a volcanic event. There was a release of magma, not explosively like volcanoes. It just oozed out of the ground and spread across the landscape. This happened in Siberia, and it formed what we now call the Siberian Traps. But it was a thousands of year long event, tens of thousands of years, that oozed out magma and released CO2 into the atmosphere, raising the temperature of the Earth, just as we are doing today. And it raised the temperature of the Earth. They could measure they could surmise how much CO2 was released. And they decided, based on other evidence, that the Earth got 5 degrees C warmer than it was at the time. We're now, just for comparison, we are knocking on the door of about 2 degrees C. And some research coming out of Hansen's lab, James Hansen's lab, suggests we're going to go to like 4.7, probably inevitably. Even though we're only at 2, we understand the system well enough to know we're going to somewhere between 4 and 5. Well, what's interesting is that the PETM, as near as people could figure, got to about 5 degrees C, which is warm. That's a big deal. For humans, our civilization ends abruptly at maybe somewhere between 2 and 3. But the Earth got to 5 from the CO2 released via the Siberian Traps. But the scientists who studied the PETM couldn't come up with a way that it actually got to 10, because that's what happened. That they can accommodate, using CO2 releases, a rise in Earth temperature to 5, but they couldn't account for what actually happened during the thermal maximum when it went to 10. So there was a whole other group of people who were studying methane clathrates. And they said, oh, wait, hold on. You think the Earth got to 5? Well, then we can account for the other 5. Because if you can increase the temperature of the Earth that much, you're going to destabilize the methane clathrates. And they're all going to be released. Probably catastrophically and irreversibly. And then you go from 5 to 10. And that seems to be the answer now. So we've done this before. We, humans, did not do this before, but this has happened before. Now, Hansen and his lab is predicting that we have done enough already to disturb the Earth system, even though it's still early days, to disturb the Earth system, that now it's going to go to 5 degrees C or close to it. And that's sort of the magic witching hour, right? We've seen this happen before. And what happens at 4 or 5 degrees C above baseline? Well, you might set off the methane clathrates. You might melt the methane clathrates. And then you set off the methane bomb. And that's a catastrophic release of methane, which is a massively important greenhouse gas. So it could be that with James Hansen's work to date, getting us to 4, maybe 5, getting close, time to worry, we may go straight to 10. Now, it won't matter to us as a civilization, because by the time we get to 2 or 3, civilization we have known it is done for. Catastrophically finished. There'll still be lots of humans, but they won't be civilized humans the way we are civilized now. Not that we are, but whatever we are, they won't be doing what we are doing now. This civilization will be done for. See my book. It was 100 days. Kind of about that. The PETM, when it reached 10 degrees C above normal, because of all the events, including finally the catastrophic failure of the methane clathrates, that was an extinction event. It wasn't huge, but it's notable. It wasn't the worst, but it's still noteworthy. And we will be looking at the same thing here. Would it include humans? Sure, could. Can't rule it out. And on the subject of humans, we are going to be in big trouble sometime in the next 2 years. Currently we are. Currently we're in big trouble. And I am going to make an argument, as I do in my book, that all of this trouble is actually due to global heating. Now, maybe not all of it. Where did Trump come from? I don't know. What's Trump about? Okay. What about the rise of fascism in Germany? What's that about? Well, I can tell you what some of it is about. And then I'll go into my list of things that are going to destabilize us. The rise of right-wing parties in Europe and the rise of the right wing in America was due to a collapse of agriculture in Syria and North Africa. The collapse of agriculture was due to drought, which was due to global heating. They're still trapped in drought. And the farmers, when they could no longer grow crops and feed themselves and their animals, they had to abandon their farms and go into the cities, as you do. They were looking for food. They were looking for water, shelter, medicine, some place for their children to go to school. They had to abandon their communities and go into the city. Well, in Syria and North Africa, when people started showing up in the cities, the totalitarian regimes said, you can't do that. We don't have enough for everybody. You were fine when you were in the countryside and you were subsistence farmers and you could feed yourself, but you can't come into our cities and be fed. So they put them on boats and sent them to Europe. And there was this whole flood of people flooding out of North Africa, flooding out of Syria into Europe. And they showed up in Greece, and they showed up in Italy, and they showed up in France. And initially, the European nations were like, okay, wow, suffering masses, we'll take you in. But the suffering masses never stopped, because the problems never stopped, because it's global heating, and it never went away. Their lifestyles were done. These were climate refugees. So they show up in Europe. And now they're in European cities, and the peoples of Europe are trying to accommodate them, because that's what you do when you're civilized. And mostly probably it worked, but sometimes it didn't. And sometimes the people were angry, and they were, especially the young people, right? Maybe they enter Europe when they're 10 years old, but now it's been 5, 7, 10 years later, and they're angry. Now they don't have jobs. Now they don't speak the language. Now they haven't been assimilated, and now they're angry. And so there was things going on in Europe that were attributable to these refugees, whether rightly or wrongly, doesn't matter. It was attributed to the refugees, to the immigrants, right? To the brown-skinned people from the Levant and from North Africa. They're a problem because they're a problem. No, they're not. They're displaced people. Yeah, that's going to be a problem. You could have done something about that, but you didn't. And so now they're a problem. Whose fault is that? Maybe it's the fault of the Syrian government. I don't know. But here they are, and now they're being a problem. It was because of that we had Brexit. No, there were other reasons. Okay, it's because of that we had Brexit. They didn't want the immigrants coming across the channel. And the European nations said, hey, you're part of the EU. You have to accept some of these. And the British people said, we're an island. We don't have to accept jack shit. And so, Brexit. At the same time, Trump was riding the wave of populism and fear of immigration. And here in the U.S., we are still riding a wave of fear of immigration. It's an echo of what happened in Europe. But it's kept alive because it works politically with the Americans. Most Americans rub shoulder with immigrants all the time. Most of the immigrants actually are not climate refugees. They're just coming here to work. There's jobs. Jobs pay relatively well. The work is hard, but there's a lot of it. And so they come and they do the work. What are they doing? Construction work. They're working in the fields. They're working in restaurants, hospitality, right? Maintenance, all these kinds of things. Work that Americans don't want to do. Americans don't want to pick strawberries. Americans don't want to put roofing on houses in the summer. Give me a break. They're not going to do that. These immigrants are not taking jobs that Americans want. Boo-hoo. No, they're not. Give me a break. Americans are too fat and diabetic to pick strawberries. Forget it. The farmers know that, by the way, and they still voted for Trump. That's a long story right there. But that whole shit show about the immigrants from Africa and from Syria and Turkey, and they're all coming here and they're bringing their brown skin and all their problems and their Islam and all this stuff. And it's going to be a big problem. We have to get them out of here. We have to send them back and no more. And now we want right-wing parties. And we want, blood and soil and all this kind of stuff. And it spilled over into the U.S. Now we're stuck with Trump. Wow. This kind of thing is what's in store for us now. It's all driven by global heating. The Syrian refugees were fleeing a collapse of agriculture in Syria. That was 100% due to global heating, as happened in Africa. The fires that are raging in Canada and the U.S. are creating refugees. These people, like the people in paradise, they just become homeless. And then the people in the communities where they have to settle as homeless people bitch and complain about these. Who are these people? They're living in vans. They're living in the backseat of a sedan. They have an RV. Where'd they come from? What are they doing here? I hate this. Get them out of here. Well, they're climate refugees because the community up the mountain burned down. And it's been 5 years and you've already forgotten that. But that's what happened, and that's where they came from. And if you talk to them, they can tell you, well, I'm here because my house burned down in paradise. Or my farm failed in Syria, and I can never go back. Or my farming community failed in Tunisia or Egypt or wherever it was, and I can never go back. There's no water. All the animals died. I can never go back. But no one will ask these questions, and so we never know where these people came from. They're all climate refugees, 100% of it. I already mentioned the collapse of financial institutions like the insurance companies. This is having massive impacts on U.S. communities, especially in places like California and Florida. And there's a lot of people in California. And there's a lot of people in Florida. And they have money and political influence. And they're being driven out of their homes because they can't afford the insurance. Do you think this isn't going to have an impact? Do you think this isn't going to leave a mark? This is the beginning of revolution. When people get sick and tired of the insurance companies, then they vote for Donald Trump. Because he's going to tell them a happy story. He's going to fix the insurance industry. He's going to change the price of eggs. He's going to make your homes habitable again. He's going to turn back the tide and stop the floods. And climate change is a hoax. He's going to tell a story. And people like the story. So they elect Donald Trump. Or they elect Nazi parties in Germany, or whatever the situation is. They're spinning a happy story, and people want to hear it because their lives are being destroyed by global heating. That's why the forests are burning. That's why the flooding is happening in Florida. That's where the hurricanes come from. The massive hurricanes that spin out of nowhere, come out of nowhere, and come ashore, and destroy all the homes. That's all climate change. 100% of it. No, it's a hoax, and you're fear-mongering. You're making shit up. No, I'm not. And you'll know I'm not when every year it gets worse. Every year, there's more people been displaced. Every year, there's more communities that get emptied out. Every year, there's more farms that fail. Every year, there's fewer places that crops will grow. As this proceeds apace, it's going to be harder and harder to say it's a hoax. But in the meantime, our civilization is being destroyed. In addition to losing the financial institutions like insurance companies and eventually banks, we're also going to lose infrastructure. Texas, a few years back, almost their entire electrical grid collapsed because it got so cold. Oh, you think, wait, how do you tie that in with global heating? See my previous videos about that. We're having massive cold waves here in the U.S. right now. I mean, as I'm recording this video, we're having massive cold waves followed by massive heat waves, followed by massive cold waves. There's a cold storm coming to the southeast, including Texas, right now. It's forecast. It's going to arrive Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That is being called life-threatening. This caused by global heating. And I know that doesn't register. I know this is complicated. It's shutting down the infrastructure. You won't have electricity. You won't have a water supply. Your water will freeze. You won't be able to get to the store. The roads will be frozen for 2, 3, maybe 4 days. You won't be able to get to the store. Do you have enough food to eat? Do you have enough electricity? Will your house freeze? Will you be able to cook? Will you be able to heat? These things are completely up in the air now for a lot of people who live in these parts of the United States of America that don't see freezing rain and snow. Are they going to be able to cope? Well, the answer is no, they will not. And if they can't, then this is a manifestation of global heating. See my earlier videos on why that's happening. As sea level rises and as coastal communities began to suffer, and as entire industries like the insurance industry began to suffer, this is going to have an impact on whether we can get at raw materials, whether we can get at food, whether we can get at energy or water. As we go forward from here, there's going to be, every year, there's going to be another example of some part of our built environment that fails. You can have dam failures from too much rain. You can have reservoir failures from too little rain. And when a reservoir fails and you can't get the water out because the water's too low, then the downstream users of that water have a serious problem. The Colorado River system here in the U.S. is in terminal decline. They've been noticing for 20 years. They built the reservoirs on the Colorado River to trap water during a period of time when water was abundant. It was raining a lot and snowing in the mountains. So they built all these reservoirs, filled up all these reservoirs, and then based on the amount of water they had, they created places like Los Angeles in a desert, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Arizona, agriculture in Arizona. But the rainy period ended. And now there's discussion that was like, well, that was always going to be temporary. That was some little aberration in the climate that, yeah, it rained a little more for 80 or 100 years, and we noticed, and we thought that was forever and eternal, but then it stopped. And now those same reservoirs that are feeding these places like Los Angeles. Yeah, Los Angeles gets, half of its water from the Colorado system? And then there's Phoenix, Arizona, and Las Vegas, Nevada, that are like totally dependent on the water coming out of the Colorado system. And it's running out because climate change. What are those people going to do? You can survive without food. You can survive without a job. Government can give you money. They can bring in food. If your agriculture fails, they can ship in food, but you can't survive without water. They can't bring you enough water. You need so much water. You need so much more water than you need food, or even electricity. That if you don't have water, you just fail. That's what's happening in Iran right now. They're having a catastrophic water failure. And the city of Tehran and the surrounding urban area, there's like 15 million people, are basically on the move. They're not viable anymore. And even if you could ship in food and even if they had electricity, there's not enough water to support 15 million people. They're having to leave. Where are they going to go? Are they going to go to Europe? Oh, they might, right? Ooh, now there's a thought. Iranians going to Europe? How about Russia? They might go to Russia. Are they going to be welcomed there? Are they going to go to the U.S.? We had a lot of Persians in the U.S. That's what they call themselves. We're Persians. We're not Iranian because those are a bunch of fuckers. We're Persians. We remember who we are. We have a lot of Persians here in the U.S. We have a lot of Persians in the Bay Area. Are they going to come to the Bay Area? Will they be welcomed? Will they just bring their problems? Yeah, we have enough water probably, but will they find housing? Will they be able to afford the housing? Well, if they're millionaires, there's a lot of millionaire Iranians. They might come to the Bay Area. They might buy the housing, boost up the prices. You know, all the houses are suddenly selling for $3 million because there's Iranians, Persians coming in here with suitcases full of money to buy houses, pay cash, and just to start over. So now all the houses are $3 million a piece. That could happen. You think that's not going to leave a mark? You think that's not going to make people angry? You think that's not going to look bad? Yeah, that'll look bad. And then people will be voting for Donald Trump again because he's going to have a story about how he's going to fix that. And he's going to send all the immigrants back, and he's going to send these people away. And like, well, they want to be here. Good luck figuring that out. All this resource constraint and competition for resources, including housing, thank you very much, leads to the rise of totalitarian regimes. I've been mentioning Donald Trump a lot, but it's happening in Europe as well. It's also happening in the UK. And it'll happen everywhere. Everywhere where resources become constrained, there's going to be the rise of authoritarians. They start out as populists. Populists tell you what you want to hear. They're popular. They tell you what you want to hear. And then from then, they become totalitarian. The populist will say, you're a great people. We're going to make America great again. Streets paved with gold, low inflation, jobs are going to come back. But then, when that doesn't really work, because it doesn't comport with reality, then they have to become authoritarian. And the jump from being a populist, like, you're all good, you all deserve jobs, to being an authoritarian, is when you can't deliver on your promise. And then you have to deliver malice and cruelty and punishment. And what do the totalitarians do? What did Bad Mustache Man do? Right? You start out promising everything will be better, and when everything doesn't get better, then you have to find a scapegoat. And Machiavelli, I was reading something about Machiavelli. What was it I was reading about Machiavelli? Do I have it here in my notes? Oh yes, I do have it in my notes. This is Machiavelli. We all know Machiavelli, right? Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. Repeat. Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. And that's what happens when you slip from being a populist promising, a chicken in every oven, to being a totalitarian. People just follow from a happy story into a bloodthirsty story. Because the story is, I'm going to get you what you need. And we're going to punish the people who have caused you to fall. When you're having resource shortages and food crises and refugee crises and fires burning your communities, right? That's not good. And when you can't afford insurance, and when you can't afford to build a home, and you can't afford to buy a home, and some of that buying of homes may be impossible because of refugees, wealthy refugees with money and cash buying up all the homes so that you can't afford one. That's a problem. Now you can't afford a home, and you can't afford a home because of refugees. Rich ones, millionaires, still refugees, had to leave Tehran because there's no water. They brought all their money and they brought all their wealth and they came to America and they came to the Bay Area and they bought up all the homes. Wealthy refugees, still climate crisis, and yet here they are. And so when you can't cope Because the resources that you thought were going to be available to you personally, the resources in your community, even the very home you lived in as a child, is actually no longer available to you. And why would your home that you lived in as a child no longer suddenly be available to you? Because you can't afford the insurance. Because some real estate agent representing some Persian fleeing waterless Tehran came to the front door, or called your landlord, or called whatever, and said, hey, I've got a suitcase full of money and I want your home. And so someone takes the money. And now you can't live in that home anymore. And now your community, one by one, fills up with people who don't speak the language, don't have the culture, aren't from here. They're not from here. You know what that means? They're not from here, right? Who are these people? They're not from here. And now you have a resource crisis. There's no homes. There's no jobs. The price of everything goes through the roof. You can't afford eggs. And then you get a populist who comes along and says, oh, I can fix that for you. This is easy. Elect me and I'll show you. And then you elect him and he can't. Because you can't. You also can't change climate change. So you're not doing anything. And now you have to resort to violence to placate people who are afraid and angry. And this is the stepwise fashion that this goes. And we are now in the steps of this. And this is happening all over the planet. The narratives become things like, well, it's not a complex problem. It doesn't involve climate change. It doesn't involve insurance companies. It doesn't really involve the financial industries. It doesn't involve real estate. It doesn't involve diminishing resources and diminishing returns. It's all about things like blood and soil, the enemy within, paranoia, conspiracies, okay, mysticism and magical thinking. When Hitler rose to power, he was originally a populist, saying, you should not have lost the First World War. You are a great people. You are a worthy people. You have roots in ancestral humanity. You used to be great. Well, we're going to make Germany great again. And then it veered hard into mysticism and magical thinking, and pretty soon the Germans were the Aryans, who were descended from the lost races of Atlantis after Atlantis failed, and Hyperborea, and all this manifest destiny. And pretty soon they were taking over countries because they figured they are great enough, and they used to be in those countries, so those countries are ours now. And it just went off the rails, because it always does. And it's trying to simplify complexity. And we live in a complex world. We live inside the Earth dynamic system. Most people don't even know that. Most people don't even know that their weather is, and where their crops are grown, and the rainfall, and the trade routes, and the trade winds, and everything else. All this stuff that's been in place for thousands of years is actually inside of a big machine called the Earth system. They don't understand that. And if the Earth system is on the move because of global heating, they don't understand that either. And when the growing zones move, and when people run out of water and have to become climate refugees, they don't understand that. And when people with money flood into your community and buy up the housing and buy up the resources and have their children on all your schools, and there's people from not here, they don't understand that either. They don't understand any of it. It's too complex. And the problem with complex systems is they fall apart. The complexity that confronts people drives them mad. Refugee crises, collapse of complexity, collapse of supply chains, all driven by global heating, all driven by the Earth system being on a trajectory, and we can't cope because we can't. Seneca said something that Hugo Bardi quoted in his book, and he called it the Seneca Cliff. Here's what Seneca said more than 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago. It would be some consolation for the feebleness of ourselves and our works if all things should perish as slowly as they came into being. But as it is, increases are of sluggish growth, but the way to ruin is rapid. And that's called the Seneca Cliff. And as we head for the Seneca Cliff, as the Earth system drags us out of normalcy and into collapse, because that's what's going to happen to us. We won't be able to cope. People are going to lose their fucking minds. The human story goes off the rails. And the Germans lost the First World War and went off the rails into the Second. The entirety of humanity is going to go off the rails. 8,000 million humans, 8 billion humans, is going to go off the rail. And the reality of this is only discernible and understandable through science. Science is an intellectual pursuit. You have to have degrees. You have to talk to other scientists. It's a closed community. No one understands math or charts or the Earth system or all this complexity. Scientists are complex. No one can talk to them. Science itself is complex. Climate science, doubly so. The Earth system is complex. It all just gives you a big headache, a migraine. You can't face it. And then you're talking to Machiavelli. Okay? Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. And that's how it is. And that's where we are. And that's where we're going. And this only gets worse. We are going into the jaws of destruction. Some of it will be because of climate change and global heating. The ice will melt. The rain will be a torrent, or the rain will be gone, or the rain will move 200 miles to the north. The trees will die. The trees will burn. There will be smoke and haze, and we won't be able to breathe the air. Our properties will become uninsurable. We'll have to leave. Our properties will burn. Our properties will flood. We'll have to leave. The food supply will begin to collapse because the places where you could grow food suddenly don't have water, or have too much water, or have raw water at the wrong time of year, or because it burns, or because something else happens. People couldn't afford the insurance, so they left. So they left the fields. Or someone came along and deported all the farm workers. So they left the fields. And now the fields are fallow. They can't be harvested. They can't be planted and they can't be harvested. The food is gone because there was no workers. Or the food was gone because there was no rain. Or the food is gone because there's too much rain, or at the wrong time of year. Or the food is gone because it was too hot. Or the food was gone because it was too hot one week and too cold the next week and then too hot the week after that. These things, we are being driven into a trap by global heating. The Earth system has become a trap. It's no longer our home. It's a trap. We are already in it. We cannot get out of it. Oh, people are talking about that. Why do you think Elon Musk wants to go to Mars? Why do you think last September all the Christians in America wanted to rapture themselves to heaven? Why do you think all the billionaires in Silicon Valley, right here where I live, so I know these people, right? I hear about them all the goddamn time. Why do you think all the billionaires are creating bunkers and private islands in Hawaii and private islands in the Caribbean and seasteading? You know, building islands, buying cruise ships and filling them full of billionaires. Why do you think all that's happening? They know. They know what I know. They're not idiots. A lot of them have access to scientists on their staff. And if the bright scientist isn't on their staff of their big billion, trillion-dollar company, then they have to just make a phone call and have the right scientist show up for a coffee lunch. And they could bring me in if they wanted to. Mark Zuckerberg wants to talk to me. I'll talk to Mark Zuckerberg. Pay me up front. I'll tell you everything you want to know. I'll tell you exactly what your situation is. And no, that is not a good place to hide. Yes, that other place is. I can tell him everything he wants to know. But it's complicated. But Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, they don't mind the complication. But you think you're going to be able to feed all this complication to the hoi polloi, the masses, who don't have degrees and don't have billions of dollars and don't want to talk to a scientist and wouldn't hire one and wouldn't be able to and couldn't find one? Do you think that the average man, Joe and Jane Sixpack, is going to have access to any of this? Or understand even the least part of it? No, they won't. I'm on here. I've been on here for about 2 hours now. This is complicated shit. This is amazingly complicated. Yes, Mark Zuckerberg would listen to me. He wouldn't give me 5 minutes or a YouTube short or a TikTok, a 1 minute TikTok. He'd want to sit me down for the entire fucking day feed me breakfast, lunch, and even an evening meal. And we take 8 hours to talk about this. Not a 2-hour YouTube video that goes out into the void that no one's going to listen to. He'd pay me $100,000 to spend 8 hours with him in his private quarters going over all this shit. And I wouldn't even have to prepare in advance. We could sit down with a computer, sit down with a whiteboard, and go at it hammer and tongs. And in 8 hours, he would know what he needs to know. I could tell him everything he needs to know in 8 hours. Probably 4, but, he's paying for the full 8 hours. He gets the 8 hours. We'd be looking at the map. We'd be looking at the globe. We'd be looking at this. We'd be looking at this shit for 8 hours. Yeah, you bet. We're going to look at this. Fires in Africa. These are all fires in Africa. Now, they're seasonal fires, but it doesn't matter. They're burning in Africa. Here's the fires in the Amazon. Are there any fires in the boreal forest? It's winter up here. I doubt there are. No, there's not much. Oh, there's a little bit. There's some fires in the boreal forest. You see the little red dots? I don't have my tool. I'm not going to bother circling them. But you can see the fires in Africa. There you go. There's the fires in Africa. Shit's on fire, baby. Shit's on fire. It burns every year. Burns. It still burns. Sorry, it's burning. Populist storytellers rise to power. People like Trump, Hitler, and Mussolini. Before them, we had Machiavelli. So this has been going on a long time. And, I don't know. I doubt Trump read anything. But Hitler and Mussolini, who were, relatively well-versed, they may have read their Machiavelli. Mussolini probably did. Mussolini was a journalist. He probably knew all about Machiavelli. Fellow Italian, right? Did Hitler? Well, Hitler learned everything he learned from Mussolini, to be honest. He even got the word fascism from Mussolini. Where did Trump get it? He just got it from history, right? And he's surrounded by sycophants and yes men and bootlickers, and he doesn't have to know anything. What you need to know is that we can't save ourselves from this. Global heating cannot be stopped. The interruptions to civilizational processing, the food supply, the supply chains, manufacturing, water supply, agriculture, none of that, the collapse of any of that cannot be stopped. It is all now baked into the cake. We're going to have to cope. We're going to have to adapt. Most of us will fail to do so. Now you might be thinking, okay, if science knows all this, and if Jeff Bezos knows all this, and Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and people like me come on here all the time and talk about this all the time, could we save ourselves? If it's there in the science, couldn't we save ourselves? And the answer is no, we cannot. And because we cannot have a conversation about this. Let me explain why we cannot, and therefore we will not, and we will never talk about saving ourselves from this. We are dependent on fossil fuels for 100% of everything we do, 100% of the time. If you were to deprive people anywhere on the earth, any of the 8,000 million people, if you were to deprive them of either fossil fuels or the products of manufacturing and modern agriculture, they would die. Period. Without fossil fuels, you cannot have driving, flying, movement of goods, shipping, right, trains, movement of money, banking, finances, or jobs. And most people without those things would simply perish. Now, if they don't have those things, but they're surrounded by a functioning civilization who can give them food, give them shelter, give them support, then they can survive. But when all of that collapses, then all of the 8,000 million of us who are inside that machine have nowhere to go. There is no outside that's going to come and help you and hold your hand. You're inside, and the inside of the machine has just fallen over. We can never stop burning fossil fuels. We must stop burning fossil fuels. If we don't stop burning fossil fuels, then we get 10 degrees C above the average Earth temperature. and the planet is basically a hothouse and a mass extinction event. And that could come quickly. That could come in our lifetime. We could be looking at 4 or 5 degrees C. And that's already the end of civilization. That's already enough sea level rise, enough heat waves, enough collapse of food chains. There's enough happening by the time you get to 3 or 4 degrees C that all that's happening and we're done for. Civilization is done for. And then we die. We perish. Because we live inside this machine. Part of it we built. And without it, we can't survive. We have no story about surviving. Maybe you think you can go back to farming. Maybe you think, but farming requires tractors. And what, do you have a horse? Do you have a plow? Do you know how to use a horse? Do you know how to use a plow? No, you don't. Probably nobody does. So we can't do that. We are stuck with nothing but bad choices. That's why this is called a wicked problem. A wicked problem, look it up on Wikipedia. A wicked problem is a problem that has no solutions. And people think, oh, well, there's always a solution to every problem. No, there isn't, because there's a whole class of problems called wicked problems that have no solution. In the end, physics wins. We are entering an age of consequences where there will be collapse, contraction, depopulation, forgetfulness, fragmentation, constant migration, rise of authoritarian regimes, rise of warfare. The Third World War, maybe even a nuclear war. We don't even know where this ends. And these things are all starting now and will only accelerate. And in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, we could find ourselves completely embedded in a complete collapse of civilization, including a massive die-off because civilization feeds us. I can say more about this. I think I've gone on long enough. I'll have more to say later. Yeah, I may do another video. And in the meantime, as usual,